He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we have one heck of a recommended topic. But before we get into this creature cryptid entity, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our social media channels, X, YouTube, Facebook, and Patreon. Should you wish to reach us directly, you can do so via cryptidclues@gmail.com. Lastly, if you missed last week's episode, be sure to take a look at it because it's just filled with some Sasquatch encounters. It's doing great on YouTube. A lot of interaction. It's fantastic. But without further ado, shoutouts to my friend Emily for bringing this creature to my attention. I had never heard of it. There is an exceptionally large amount of cryptids out there, and I love learning about new ones on a daily basis. So this is such a cryptid that, like I said, I didn't know it existed. The Pennsylvania Squonk. Now, this squonk is a creature rooted in American folklore, particularly as a fearsome critter. Now, this elusive being is said to inhabit the dense hemlock forests of northern Pennsylvania. And the legend of the squonk emerged in the late 19th century. It was a period when Pennsylvania was just a hub of the timber and hunting industries. Now, according to lore, the squonk is an extremely shy and sorrowful creature, perpetually weeping due to its perceived ugliness. Its skin is ill-fitting and covered in warts and blemishes, causing it great distress. The squonk is so self-conscious that it prefers to hide from sight, wandering the forest in solitude. When cornered or captured, it is said to dissolve into a puddle of its own tears, making it almost impossible to catch. Now, looking back at this creature of myth's history, the earliest known written account of the squonk comes from a book by William T. Cox called Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods, with a few desert and mountain beasts. This is dated 1910. And I included a link in the description below to this book that is available online to read if you are so inclined. I will read a passage now from the book that caught my eye, and then I'll expand more on the squonk. And I quote, "Every lumber region has its lore. Thrilling tales of adventure are told in camps wherever the logger has entered the wilderness, and the lumberjack is an imaginative being. And a story loses none of its interest as it's carried and repeated from one camp to another. Stories which I know to have originated on the Penobscot of the Kennebec are told, somewhat strengthened and improved, in the redwood camps of Humboldt Bay. Yarns originating among the river drivers of the Ottawa, St. Croix, and the upper Mississippi are respun to groups of listening loggers on Vancouver Island. But every lumber district has its own peculiar tales. Some of their songs also, and nearly all have mysterious stories or vague rumors of dreadful beasts with which to regale newcomers and frighten people unfamiliar with the woods." End quote. In the 2015 edition of Fearsome Creatures by Hal Johnson, the squonk is actually reimagined as a creature that is physically and actually just a pig. So this version of the squonk is described as being covered in warts, with cauliflower ears coated in wax and hair. Its tusks are yellow and crooked, and its rheumy eyes are constantly just weeping tears. It stands on 4 legs, although the right hind leg is supposedly transparent, giving the appearance of it only having 3.5 legs. Now, the squonk's most fearsome characteristic is not its physical appearance, but its contagious misery. This creature embodies such profound sorrow that it spreads its despair to anyone who encounters it. Now, residing in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania, it's a region that is just rich in natural beauty and especially steeped in folklore. One notable tale involves John Paul Wentling, who was Hal Johnson's supposed arch nemesis. So Wentling attempted to capture a squonk, but the creature's overwhelming sadness caused him to dissolve into his own tears and perish, mirroring the squonk's own legendary ability to dissolve into a puddle of tears when cornered. Now, in this retelling, the Squonk's method of reproduction is uniquely described as binary fission, a process more commonly associated with single-cell organisms, adding a layer of bizarre and surreal biology to the creature. Its scientific name in this version is Theristus lacrimosus, which just is to highlight its sorrowful nature. That is, some of those terms, the scientific explanations are a little bit beyond my full understanding. If you're listening and you happen to be fully cognitive on what that means, then let me know in the comments, because the fact that this thing is very difficult to find, and upon capturing it can dissolve into its own tears, being able to identify the method of the Squonk's reproduction, that's an interesting claim. But again, this is just a retelling of this creature. It's also interesting that if you are to capture this thing, you have to be careful because of the supposed ability that this thing has to project its own self-conscious, sorrowful energy onto the viewer, and the viewer would basically collapse into their own tears by taking on that sorrowful energy. But I digress. We're going to look a little bit here at the terrain. Now, the Pocono Mountains, they're simply referred to as the Poconos quite often, and they're a region in northeastern Pennsylvania. Now, they're renowned for their scenic beauty, outdoor recreation, diverse wildlife. The Poconos, located again in northeastern Pennsylvania, are encompassing parts of Pike, Monroe, Wayne, and Carbon counties. Now, the region is characterized by rolling hills, dense forests, sparkling lakes, swift rivers, and the highest peak here is Camelback Mountain, which rises to about 2,133 feet. The mountains are dominated by deciduous and mixed forests. Common tree species include eastern hemlock, which is the state tree of Pennsylvania. Now, they're often found in moist, shaded areas. We have oak and maple, various species, including red oak, white oak, and sugar maple, all widespread. Birch and beech, common in both upland and lowland areas. And then pine and spruce, found in both natural stands and plantations. So the wildlife that we have here includes the following: white-tailed deer, black bears, eastern coyotes, red foxes, bobcats, small mammals, bald eagles, ospreys, songbirds, waterfowl, snakes, frogs, salamanders, trout, bass, walleyes, tons of stuff. Now, of course, we got a few rich national park spots here as well. Notably, Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. This is a 70,000 acre park, and it spans from Pennsylvania, New Jersey. It offers the basics, hiking, camping, water activities. This basically is along the Delaware River. Promised Land State Park, now it's known for its large lake, campgrounds, extensive trail system. Hickory Run State Park features a boulder field, national natural landmark, and miles of hiking trails. We have Big Pocono State Park, which is located, as we said earlier, Camelback Mountain, offering panoramic views and hiking trails. And then we also have Tobyhanna State Park and Goldsboro State Park. Now, these parks are popular for boating, fishing, and hiking. On top of housing the two major cities of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has a total of 19 national parks, which include the ones, like I said here above. So Pennsylvania is no doubt a pretty good spot for something to hide in. And this isn't the first time that we've talked about it on the show either. We've highlighted some other cryptids that they've taken a liking to Pennsylvania. But it's hard for me to decide where I stand on the Squonk's existence. Aside from initial tellings of this creature, I've not found a single piece of recent discussion on sightings regarding it. Now, while wild swine do get witness reports in Pennsylvania, it's still exceptionally rare. So it seems to be one of those creatures that is maybe a tourist marketing pitch, dare I say, maybe similar to the Ogopogo. Now, you can argue that Ogopogo sightings still occur, and, well, you aren't wrong. But we know most of those sightings are misidentifications, while the small remainder of them are simply just unknown. So if we were to look at a few wild swine roaming the Poconos, well, back in the day, folks might hear some squeals from the woods and think the worst. But if something like this did exist once upon a time, it sounds like its own depression is the source of its extinction, unfortunately. It's similar to the Dover demon, extinction aside, so to speak, but Reuben and I did a full coverage episode on that where witnesses saw this thing over a very short time frame, and after that, it was never seen again. And I used to subscribe to the idea that cryptids were unique, only one of a kind. I don't deny most are, but one Bigfoot, one Dogman, one Ogopogo, etc. This, of course, was when I was little. It wasn't until I was older and started reading more into these creatures that I realized, wow, these guys are everywhere. They're not exclusively limited to one. But the Dover demon that remains a one and done creature in my opinion. And I just think it's interesting that you have some of these creatures make an appearance in one state of time in our history and then just disappear. Like I said, I couldn't find anything regarding this creature in more modern times. It seems like it was just one thing, and maybe it is just limited to folklore. Maybe it is totally just a legend. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that it's fun and it creates that rich culture for your community, and it's great for tourism and whatnot. But I digress. A part of me suspects that this swine could have existed, but that comes in part with the confirmation of Bigfoot's existence. And I guess I'm somewhat a hypocrite. I'm trying not to be, but because I haven't had a Bigfoot experience of my own, I still believe in them. So when I say maybe I don't believe in this, see, that's where I'm getting to be a little bit of a hypocrite. But for me, when the truth is finally revealed regarding Bigfoot, it allows me a conscious state to... conscious state, is that how I want to say that? It allows me consciously to accept the fact that everything needs to be reevaluated because it would change everything. Dare I say how we view ourselves too. Now that is a rabbit hole for another time, but in short, once we discover one of these things and we can display the evidence and it is scientifically backed and factual that this thing is real, meaning Bigfoot, then that opens up a can of worms. We examine ourselves, we examine the world that we have developed and grown up in, and we have to realize that things are a lot smaller than we once believed them to be. And what kind of can of worms does that open? And I've said this before, if Bigfoot is scientifically proven to be a fact out there, then Dogman, Mothman, a whole lot of other things start to trickle in. And maybe that's the same case for the Squonk. Now, in closing, it does seem like the Squonk has mastered the art of avoidance. More so than Bigfoot has, dare I say. Like we mentioned, it has an overwhelming case of shyness from the world and a never so strong urge just to avoid being seen. Venturing out specifically in the dim light of twilight and dusk, the Squonk chooses this time so that its shadows are long and details are obscured, which are supposed to offer the Squonk a bit of respite from its own appearance. It's claimed this creature hates moonlit nights due to the fact that it is afraid that it might catch a glimpse of itself in water's reflection. Now, a lot of this avoidance has transcended into popularity due to humans' tendency to avoid confronting aspects of ourselves that we find difficult to accept. And I thought that was a pretty interesting comparison. And just the fact that this mythological cryptid creature has this kind of fascinating implication attached to it that is a reflection of ourselves. And it's a pretty powerful allegory for self-image issues. The Squonk's fear of seeing itself mirrors humanity's tribulations with self-acceptance. So this might be something I'll bring up another time, but we've addressed on the show noises in the woods, where particularly women are in remote areas or cabins and they start to hear crying. Now, it's specifically, I would say, a baby cry, but it's some kind of dreadful mourning crying that's taking place out in the woods in this remote area. Now, this is heavily affiliated with Bigfoot hotspots, so bear that in mind, and many folks have different theories on what makes these sounds. But I personally think it's something unfriendly. I think it's something that is preying on a female's motherly tendencies, regardless of the fact that you're a mother or not. I think that there are certain genetic codings in our DNA and in us as a species. And if you hear a baby crying, you're going to address that situation. You're going to make sure they are okay. It's hard to ignore thousands of years of human programming like that, no matter what. And I'm not saying like, a guy's going to ignore something crying in the woods, but maybe that's the thing. And I'm not saying like I'm an expert when I address this, how I'm addressing it, but women are, they have that natural motherly instinct about them. And so when they hear that crying, it taps into that genetic programming of their who they are, and think, okay, I need to make sure this whoever's making this crying is okay. Now, if a guy hears this, maybe there is apprehension. I'm sure some guys might activate that too and think, oh, one of my own, maybe something that is very not primeval, just that ancient kind of thing, like, oh, like I said, one of my own, like something that is just programmed into you, like I gotta defend one of my own. I keep saying one of my own, but I hope I'm making sense. What I mean is, I think that there is just something about humanity that if you play this kind of certain beat out in the woods, it's going to tap into this ancient kind of coded strand in us that's going to draw us in and lure us in. And that is what is dangerous. Now, if you are hearing a baby crying out there, what if it isn't something sinister, like an evil Bigfoot? What if it's actually just a squonk having a bad night? So that is where I'm just trying to circle this all around to. I thought it was just, food for thought, because if these things do still exist, but we aren't seeing them, but people are hearing crying out in the woods, and these things are apparently known for having sorrowful, pitiful cries out in the woods, maybe there's something to that. Just a thought. With all that said and done, though, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Squonk of Pennsylvania. It was a lot of fun to read into this mysterious mythical creature. I wish there was a lot more on it, but I had a lot of fun just kind of like diving into what I was able to find on this thing. It certainly was a mysterious creature. I had no idea this thing existed, and hopefully I did it justice by talking about the folklore behind it and maybe shedding some light on the possible scenarios of what this creature is either up to today or was up to once back in the day. But we'll be back next week with a new episode. Reuben and I have been chatting some ideas, and we're lining up possibly an episode where we're going to discuss the top 5 cryptids and how our perspectives have changed after all the different discussions that we've had. There's so many things that we have learned and so many different people we've been able to talk to and really grow into this community. So it's going to be a good experience just to kind of do an all around kind of like cap of like, okay, this is where we're at now, this is where we stand with things, what are we thinking, and just kind of like pick each other's brains a little bit. So it'll be a good time. Stay tuned for updates on that. Now remember, you can search for us on social media: Facebook, YouTube, X, Patreon. Additionally, if you wish to reach us directly, you can do so via CryptidClues@gmail.com, or take a visit to our home base, CryptidClues.ca. So thanks again, everyone, and remember, take care and stay safe.